Just Business with Steve Thomas and John Worrell. And now, here's your host, Chris Leary.
Hello and welcome to It's Just Business on the Hogstye Network, the show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports media business industrial complex, currently stuck in the quagmire. But here at It's Just Business, it's a bright new day because we're back to a 3-person booth. John, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, man.
To the squared circle.
Thank you. It's been a little while. For those of you who don't know, last year I had a stomach ache. I went to the doctor, and by the time I saw my home again, I had stage 3 colon cancer and chemotherapy and all manner of nonsense. So I took a little bit of time off to get through that. Got through it really well. Had a lot of support from friends and family and from you guys on the show. Really appreciate it, but I missed you, and I couldn't stay away, so now I'm back.
Hey, yeah, we're glad to see you, back for sure, and I'm glad you overcame all that stuff.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And you look good. More importantly, you don't look like a cancer survivor. You just look like a normal guy, and that's important.
Yeah, this is, I've been through a lot of things in my life, but thus far, nothing's been able to take the shine off,
Hey,
I'm gonna keep it going.
You've been pretty open on social media, which has been helpful for people wanting to follow along, but you seem to still have a lot of hair. What happened?
You're gonna have to repeat that. We were breaking up a little bit there.
Well, I was just noticing you still have a beautiful head and face of hair. Did you not lose that in chemo?
No, I didn't. Today's chemotherapy, as it turns out, the doctors say that they've made some adjustments in the formula that, depending on what kind of cancer you have, you may not lose hair. But they also, to a man, have admitted that there was no chemical formula was going to stand up to this beautiful mane. And frankly, it just... if you could look under a microscope, if you put a piece of my hair under a microscope and the hair-killing chemotherapy worms coming at it, they all just get repelled in fear. So as it turns out, I was the perfect candidate to get cancer. So I'm glad I had it.
This is why we missed you on the show, John, because we get stuff like that.
Some people look at cancer because I couldn't go to work for forever, because my immune system was compromised. So a couple of benefits from that was I got what I think of as a forced sabbatical. I had 10 months off that I got to spend developing skills and learning things and exploring, as much as I could from home. And also, by the time this coronavirus came out, I was already a half a year well-practiced at social distancing. So my life didn't change at all, but everybody else lost their mind.
How long has it been since you've left your house?
Well, I go for doctor visits. So
except a doctor visit.
Without doctor visits, I think I joined some friends for lunch. I think in January.
That was it.
Yeah, I had a brief respite because I had a 5-week break from chemo on account of the holidays. So I took advantage of that to go get some lunch.
As that chair,
pretty cool.
Is that chair then shaped like you at this point?
Yeah, no, this chair and my ass have a fine relationship at this point. It's cozy, man. It's cozy. The worst part of it was that I had spent the year prior to the diagnosis, I had spent losing weight because my last diagnosis was a heart diagnosis, and the doctor said, if you don't lose weight, this is going to kill you. So I went from 265, I went down to 220. And then I got this diagnosis, and I got an oncologist, a cancer doctor, and he said, what I want you to do for chemotherapy is put on, if you can, like 40 pounds. So with the help of my friend Colonel Sanders, I shot right back up. And put that weight on. So I got back up exactly to 265 again by the end of chemo. And now that I'm done with chemo, I've got to work my way back down again. So now I'm at this morning I'm at 250.
John Worrell John Worrell, the human yo-yo.
Yeah,
The human yo-yo. Me and the Colonel, baby.
Yeah,
we're gonna
you're like Robert De Niro.
We're gonna make this chair great again.
Hey. Make this chair great again. All right. Well, with that, John, we're super excited to have you back. Steve and I held down the fort, but a 3 is always better than 2 in these conversations.
I was listening. You guys did a fantastic job. It's going to be. I can only bring it down from there. We'll see how far.
All right. Well, let's test that theory and jump into our first topics here. We can't escape coronavirus, COVID-19, the pandemic, the secret virus, all that good stuff, effect on sports, even though we're kind of in the how they come back phase, which we've been talking about. It's kind of fun and exciting, and be good to see games again. I know people could watch golf this past weekend if that's your bag, but will we see Major League Baseball, or is this labor unrest part due? Steve, you've got notebooks full of notes. What do you got?
Yeah, it is labor unrest part due. First of all, I'm glad we're recording this on Sunday. I'm kind of glad we did it on Sunday, not Saturday, because there have been recent developments within the past 24 hours in this. So, as background, once this coronavirus hit, the Major League Baseball management and then the Major League Baseball Players Association, the union, reached an agreement back in March that basically said, hey, now that this has hit, well, first of all, there's a massive dispute about what they even agreed to because these parties are both incompetent. But the general gist of it is, at least from the owners' side, is that they agreed that the owners will have the right to unilaterally restart the season with a minimum of 48 games, paid at full prorated salaries. And what I mean by prorated salaries is there's a 162-game season. If they play 48, then it's a percentage based on the 48 games. That's what I mean by
whatever.
Yeah, right. But again, the parties have strong disagreement about what this agreement even says. The agreement is not public, so we don't know. But the Players Association and the owners have gone back and forth publicly in the press. They're not sitting down in a room together, of course, because that's too easy. What they're doing is they're tweeting back and forth at each other a bunch of offers, and they've sent each other letters. So the owners claim that the owners will lose $640,000 a game if there are no fans in the stands as a result of the lack of ticket sales. And so the substance of all of these offers from ownership has been prorated salaries minus a certain amount of money. The minus part is making up for the $640,000 loss. The sum and substance of the players' argument is that isn't our problem, that's your problem. Pay us the prorated amount. We play this number of games, we get paid for this number of games. That's kind of the substance of the dispute. What has happened is, like I said, they're really going back and forth at each other on Twitter and through ESPN guys, ESPN insiders. So the players offered originally 102 games, full prorated salaries. The ownership have offered at various times 89 games, 48 games, 72 games, a bunch of different options, all at either 70 or 80% prorated. Now, what I showed these guys ahead of time is I actually did sit down and work out the math to this. And really what they're arguing about is a delta in earnings and losses of depending on the number of games, between $230 million and about $350 million. That's what they're fighting over. The baseline for the owners, by the math I did, which is, again, sort of just estimates, the baseline is about 80% for the owners to come out at least break even. So don't expect them to dip below 80%. So the very latest, Friday and Saturday, is Major League, the Players Association and the Union rejected the latest MLB counter proposal and wrote them a letter that said, listen, if your intention is to unilaterally, I'm quoting here, this is from Jeff Pass from ESPN. If your intention is to unilaterally impose the season, we again request that you inform us and our members of how many games you intend to play and when and where, which frankly is fair. And they gave a deadline of June 15th for that. And that's from a letter from Tony Clark, who's who's the union president. Major League Baseball responded on Saturday. I'm not going to read all of this because it's long, but they sent a message out, and of course they had to tweet it because why not? And basically said, Major League Baseball Association, we are disappointed the Major League Baseball Players Association has chosen not to negotiate in good faith after Major League Baseball has made 3 successive proposals that would provide our players and everyone else an amicable resolution. And it is true that the players have not negotiated at all. It is true to say that the owners have made 3 successive proposals. They've just all been substandard, and the players have basically ignored them. So where do we go from here? That's a good question. The commissioner of baseball, Rob Manfred, has said that he will, under this March agreement, which may or may not give him the power to unilaterally start the season, he is going to unilaterally start the season at 48 games and pay the players a prorated salary, which, if you do the math, comes out to a loss of about $460 million. So that is where we are here. So the question is baseball determined to lose their fans in the same way that they lost them in 1995 with the strike?
Here's a question for you, Steve. So we know that the owners have figured out, presuming they can do math as well as you, they have figured out what they need to do in order to at least try to break even or reduce their losses as far as possible. On the other side, what exactly is the push from the other side, from the players? They don't like these. They don't like these proposals. What is a proposal that the players would like to see?
Well, that's the problem. The players really haven't made a proposal that does not include full prorated salaries. And frankly, I understand from a from a business perspective, they're not owners. They don't have equity in these businesses. Why should they agree to anything less than their salary per game? That's where they are, and I frankly kind of agree with them. But the reality says that may not happen, and so let's come up with somewhere in the middle solution.
Well, and I think the other point, looking at it from the player side as well, is that when you talk about who's making the money in a business arrangement, you're looking at who's assuming the risk, and of course financially the owners generally assume the financial risk, but now you're asking the players to take part of that financial loss. And they're also taking on kind of all of the COVID risk, right? So, in going out and performing these games again, they're going to interact with each other, with the rest of the staff, the stadium people, whoever else is involved. They're the ones who are going to be interacting with other people, and not the owners. So, from that standpoint, I could also see where the players feel like they're being asked to assume more risk. Why wouldn't they be getting more compensation?
Well, that's it. That's it right there. Now, this is a lot more complicated than it seems, though, because there's a very wide disparity in payrolls between baseball teams. Unlike football, which all of them hover around the salary cap, and baseball, they hover around the number that above which they start getting fined. So baseball, there is a number above which they get fined, but the range goes $211 million with the Cubs all the way down to $53 million with the Tampa Bay Rays. So the Cubs and Ricketts, Tom Ricketts, we did a story about the Cubs ownership 7 or 8 months ago, Chris, which was great. But he's got a lot more problems to pay make his payroll than does Tampa Bay, for example. And so while I did to do these numbers, I averaged it all out to get a WAG, and the average payroll is about $131 million. So that's how I figured out losses. But the truth is, a team like Tampa Bay has bigger, may have less problems than the Cubs. And so, and baseball is not a communist collective like football is. That in football, all league revenue is shared. In baseball, that's not the case. They do make the rich teams give to the poor, but it's not anything like the NFL. And so there are haves and have-nots. For example, the Florida Marlins, new ownership group. Derek Jeter is the principal owner. He's got a ton of debt to pay. He has a massive debt service to pay. And so Jeter is looking at this going, their payroll's about $70 million. I've got to make a $70 million payroll. I've got to make debt service payments. And it's not the same for the Yankees. in the Cubs. They have other issues with the payroll, but their debt service is left. They have a lot of other income. So it's a little bit more complicated issue from an ownership standpoint than just me doing kind of an average. It is more complicated. The key is, that's the risk of ownership. You know what?
See,
Don't be an owner.
In my family, we got, I think, a $2,900 check from the IRS that was supposed to take care of all of our problems. So I don't see where a baseball family has any problems now.
Well, they do. I mean, the problem is, John, that the issue is that this is not as liquid as it seems.
No, it's not. I'm making fun.
Yeah, I mean, a team like the Florida Marlins has got a ton of debt. They have money to pay. Their margin is a lot slimmer than like the Yankees. And so they can't afford to take losses. And Derek Jeter actually doesn't have enough money to really be an owner. They just shoehorned him in there because of who he is. And so, a couple of those teams may have serious problems. And that's, I think, why the owners are taking such a hard line at this.
Why did they... Oh, go ahead, Chris. We've been dominating.
If I remember correctly, though, the Ricketts probably have their own debt financing issues as well.
They do.
Because that whole purchase was debt financing. So they may also have a problem covering.
Yeah, there's a fine line in here somewhere.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, the Cubs, and I don't know what teams are, I didn't do that much research into it to figure out what teams have a ton of debt and not, but certainly the Cubs have a $211 million payroll and they have a debt service. They might not be able to take a huge loss either. Now, some of these teams in the middle, maybe they can be okay. I don't know. But point is, it's more complicated than me just saying, okay, the loss is about $460 million, roughly on a 48-game season full prorated salary. That's true. That's an estimate, but that doesn't take individual teams into account, and that's the problem. And I think that's why the baseball owners cannot get to just, let's just agree to get everybody back on the field.
I think for a set of owners, when they look at the hard numbers and what's going on, they're willing, which may be suicide. I'm not saying it's the right call, but I think there's probably a number of owners who would prefer to not play this season because it'll be ultimately a less, though they figure it'll be a less cost to them and just reboot into next season. Now, it could destroy their sport, so it's a tightrope act, but I think part of what's probably pushing a hard line on MLB and ownership's front is that there's enough owners that said, hey, I stand the path where I lose or we lose the least amount of money is not playing the season.
Well, that makes sense, but the problem is Rob Manfred has publicly said he's going to unilaterally start the season.
Yeah,
and I don't think Manfred...
He could be wrong.
Yeah, well, he could be, but I don't think he would say something like that in public without the support of at least the key owners, whoever they are.
Yeah, I agree, but that's just what's driving their inability to act in unison.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, there's some teams, if the ownership group has been around for a while... and they have a low payroll, they have a lot fewer problems. Like, I don't know, like the Braves. The Braves ownership has been around for a while. Their payroll's $117 million. Their debt service probably isn't enormous. Whereas, like, yeah, the Cubs paid it. The Ricketts family paid an enormous amount of money, for the Cubs. The Dodgers ownership group paid an enormous amount of money for the Dodgers, and they have a $165 million payroll. So each team is a little bit different. And, yeah, I bet you you're probably right. I bet you if you give some of these owners truth serum, they'd say, I'd rather just not play because we're going to lose too much money. But that's very short-sighted because the original question I started with was, are they going to alienate the fans and cause another 95, 96, 97, very unpopular baseball era with the fan base?
Are you suggesting that if there's no baseball, then the fan base is going to take a hike?
I couldn't hear you. Say that again.
Do you think that if they don't play the games now that he's come out and promised that there are going to be games, and then if they don't deliver now, we're running the risk of the fans getting disillusioned?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah,
for sure. Now that he said it,
I think it was a stupid move to say. Every sport all around the world is facing this same problem, right? You can't, they're not having Formula One races. They've everything is shut down. And they're all facing the same problem. What if we can't play until next year? What if we can't play until whenever it may be? It is largely kind of out of their hands. And so to make some kind of a guarantee that doesn't matter what the virus, if it spikes again in the U.S. and we're going to play anyway, is ridiculous. And that was, I just think that was a really stupid move on his part.
Coronavirus.
He doesn't control coronavirus.
Coronavirus in many ways is sort of laid bare where the systems were weak, right? Status quo, things can, continue to rumble on, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that in the world of sports, we're seeing that in baseball with the most clarity. And why I say that is because there is no, call it communist, call it whatever you want, but there's no collectivist view between labor and management in baseball like there is in the other major sports, where they have, whether it's because of revenue sharing, whether it's just because of better labor relations, what have you, the other major sports have some semblance of collective need and have figured out a way to figure this out. And that to me is systemic. It's systemic in the relationships between those two entities. It's systemic in the way they've got their labor contracts set up. And baseball, yes, they were able to get back on the field, but they still don't have a collectivist approach to how their sport advances. And so now there's no way to align. It's way more difficult to align and agree and move to a plan like the NHL has, like the NBA now has, like the NFL is working on and will have. So there's no mutuality between those two entities, so you just become loggerheads, and they can't, which then gives them no path out of this, or at least few paths out of this.
Yeah, I don't know if mutuality is a word, but if it isn't,
I just made it up.
I think we have a good one.
It is a word. That is a
nice
word.
Mutuality. Can't pronounce it, but it's good.
So the counter to that, of course, is that they did the last collective bargaining agreement with no controversy whatsoever. They actually did have labor peace recently, but certainly this event has shown that they have major problems. They don't have a good whatever the relationship was to get it done, in quick and non-painful fashion a few years ago is gone. Truly is gone. And not only this, but remember that the ownership just dumped thousands of minor league players, and they cut the draft from 30 rounds to 5 this year, all to save about $1 million a team. $1 million is a lot of money to us. It's chump change to a baseball team, and so they just got rid of literally thousands of minor leaguers and didn't draft, 25 rounds of players, all to save what is a relative pittance to them. So the ownership, I don't know if that's disingenuous of them, but it shows that they're really being miserly about it if they're worried about that kind of savings.
It sounds like the whole league's kind of on thin ice a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, of course, in a healthy scenario, they make more than basketball. Everybody thinks that basketball is in better shape than baseball because they're kind of more out in front of the public a little bit, but baseball actually has a higher annual income. They make about $10 billion a year in income, in annual income, which is more than basketball. Believe it or not.
Go. But they don't have Charles Barkley.
No, but they've got some others that are outspoken, Instead, they've got Kurt Schilling, who's outspoken. Alex Rodriguez is the new face of commentary. He's outspoken and he's controversial. Baseball kind of has a general problem we talked about on the show before. They sort of don't appeal to the younger audience as well as basketball and football do. So they have a problem kind of going forward, getting the younger generation energized, and this absolutely won't help.
No. And even if let's say they figure it out and they get on their 48 game schedule or whatever, and they're also going to be returning to play in what might be a pretty, at this point, feast to famine, or famine to feast, actually, sports landscape, because you're going to have the NHL right into the Stanley Cup playoffs. You're going to have the NBA basically right into the NBA playoffs for all intents and purposes. And you're going to have probably, much to my chagrin in terms of my bet, but I think Steve's probably looking good on this one, at least for kickoff. Maybe I'll double nothing on if the season finishes, but that's a different day. But NFL will also, the King NFL will also be, back into some version of a swing of things. So they're going to come back. Remember, they own the dog days baseball. They're going to come back into the King returning and two big sports in their playoffs. And that's going to be like, and if they've dragged their heels on this, nobody's going to care.
Well, not to mention golf. PGA has a big
Yeah.
big audience. Think about Sunday at the Masters, very highly rated. And so, yeah, I mean, are the Milwaukee Brewers and the Tampa Bay Rays going to beat the Masters? No. Are they going to beat the Redskins and the Falcons? No, they're not.
Will they
I like this. We're
Will they
going to
even
have baseball games and the Masters both going on in January.
So, yeah, baseball has gotten them. What's the path out?
Well, the path out is they need to actually stop negotiating in public. They need to sit in a room and figure it out. And the owners need to be forthright about the finances, because what we haven't mentioned so far is that the ownership is counting on the playoffs to make up a lot of this debt, and they're not really being totally honest about it. The playoffs generate a ton of income, and the players don't get paid nearly as much in the playoffs, and so it's kind of free money, found money for the ownership. And so the reason why ownership is willing to do 48 games at a full prorated salary is they want to have a full normal playoff. So you cut out, because they're also running out of time, by the way. We're in the middle of June. I heard who did I hear on ESPN? It's the name's escaping me. A former ESPN pitcher, Hall of Fame pitcher, he was asked, okay, how long does it really take to get teams spun up and ready to go? He said about 3 weeks.
Hershiser.
No, it wasn't Hershiser. I wouldn't forget him. But point is, he said it'd take about 3 weeks. And so even assuming they start tomorrow, you're talking about early July. And unless you play a bunch of double headers or a bunch of, or with team game, no breaks at all, you're running out of time to get the season finished. Because the ownership has also said we will be done, period, at the end of October. We will not play baseball in November, period. That's what ownership has said. Because they can't, you're right. I mean, they can't play baseball in January. They can't.
But today's November is 20 years ago's September.
Let's not get into that, because I'm going to have
to.
They
could do November.
The fact of the matter is, ownership said we will not do November baseball, period. That's what they have said. But they're counting on a full playoffs. And so if, the players were down to 102 games, well, I don't know how you have a 102 game season and a full playoffs and still get done anywhere near November. That's the other problem, is just a flat out schedule problem. So the way out, sit in a room, come up with a number. The ownership needs to say, this is what our losses are, but this is what we expect to get in the playoffs. Here's the minimum cut we need to have. Will you do it? That's the way out. But it doesn't sound like they're willing to do that at all. Because they sent out a series of, this is our final offer notices. They've gone back and forth with that about 3 times each.
Yeah, they need to. It sounds like the first thing they need to do is stop making these immovable declarative statements. There will be this, there won't be that. This is the final. Blah 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 blah. They're not. If you don't have the power to simply mandate things, then you shouldn't be making declarative statements about will or won't happen.
Yeah, lines in the sand drawn at the shoreline.
Right. Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah, it makes no sense. And break the Twitter machine. Stop tweeting, and sit in a room. Get the ownership executive committee and the union executive committee in a room and hash it out. I bet you could figure it out in an hour if you really wanted to. If I can do this, figure out the finances on almost literally a back of a napkin in about an hour, they can too.
For those playing along at home, periodically Steve will hold up and wave around 2 pieces of paper upon which he's assured us that he has worked out all of baseball's financial problems.
I did, and it took an hour.
I believe him.
So
it took an hour. They could get it done if they wanted to.
I love to float wacky ideas on this show that often turn out to be pretty prescient.
Not you.
So what I would suggest they do, the path forward to me is realized for what Steve just said in terms of like just your runway of the season and the kind of ultimatums they've given themselves is starting to become untenable, even at the low 48 games. Just call the season and just do a giant tournament like the whatever they call that, World championship of baseball, whatever they do that every 4 years, whatever. Just do a big tournament style. You can control the locales. Every team can play. I think that would be actually the interesting way out of this.
Well, I mean, it's sort of the same issue, though, right? It still comes down to how much you're going to pay them. Call it whatever you want. Call it a tournament. Call it whatever you want. The fact of the matter is the ownership group still has to pay the players group, and they can't agree on the money. I don't know how that solves the money problem.
I think at least you say this is the only way this is going to work, and then you just come up with some lump sums. Yes, I agree. You run into similar problems, but I think you could at least you may be able to get the players to buy into something that was a one-time fix to bridge to next season that doesn't lose face, and there's still some chunk of revenue that goes to the players. But honestly, like that's just a dumb idea on my part. I really don't have a good way forward for this. I think they are deeply screwed.
My dumb idea, since we're sharing dumb ideas, my dumb idea is that you walk back your statement. You say, you know what, we spoke prematurely. That's on us. We screwed up. We thought that this was in better shape than it is. We're not going to be able to do what we thought we were going to do. Instead, what we're going to do is go out like Formula One and have some goofy esports events just to keep you guys entertained for a while. But we don't control when the coronavirus is done, and we're not really in a position to say definitively that it's going to be okay for us to move forward because we don't know that.
Well, I think it is okay for them to move forward. I think they absolutely can have baseball. There's no reason to just call King's X and say it's over because of coronavirus. I mean, I think we're well past that, to me. Basketball, we're going to get to basketball in a minute. Basketball has chosen a way to handle it. Baseball could do something similar, or they could do something that's even more lenient, frankly. But the fundamental problem, the way out, to me, is these people need to sit down in a room and talk. That's what they're not doing. They're going back and forth in the media and through guys like Jeff Passan. I have no problem with Passan, don't misunderstand me, but they're going back and forth through like Ken Rosenthal and Buster Olney and all these guys, and they're tweeting back and forth with each other. That's not productive. The way out, if there is a solution, it's for them to sit in a room and talk. That's the way, and be honestly, and that's the way out.
Yeah, whatever direction they go, I believe that's step one.
Yeah, absolutely. Will it happen? Doesn't sound like it.
No, I was going to say, I don't think the culture is there, and I don't think the mutuality is there to drive that impetus. So we'll see. I'm sure we'll talk about this in 2 weeks, would be my guess.
What team is is probably ecstatic about this? Is the Houston Astros.
Yeah, right.
Everybody's forgotten about their cheating ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, suddenly.
Oh, Astros. All right, so let's look at the NBA, which has now announced their comeback plan. It is the Orlando plan, so the sort of a one site or multiple sites in one locale way to handle, to have as many controls as possible. A couple notes about that. It's only 22 teams out of 30 are returning, 13 in the West and 9 in the East. They basically done three things. They basically created a truncated season, finish off the regular season, that also kind of acts as a bit of a training camp, just for getting players' legs back underneath them, and also acts as a bit of a play-in, because depending on where teams, basically 8 through 10, if they're in that 22, but basically they get to the 22 by, if a team even has an outside shot at making that 8th slot, then they'll be in this, whatever this mini season will be, and that's why you have it weighted more towards the West and the East, just to the quality of the teams. And then you get to play if you're within 2 games of the 8th seed, then there's a play-in round there. Basically, so all of this is, in my mind, to do 2 things: to let teams get their legs underneath them in some capacity, and to have some level of fairness by teams that had an outside shot to make the playoffs, to take their punch and see if they can get in. And to Damian Lillard that we talked about a couple weeks ago, it also gives, about 8 teams that had no shot at all, they don't have to play, and so they reduce risk on all kinds of levels. And then once the playoffs are set, the teams are set, then they'll go to a tournament. They'll go basically into their regular playoffs. I don't know if they've announced that the opening round is 5 or 7. I would imagine it'll be 7. And again, everything will be in Disney World. So that's their plan. I think it's in spirit very similar to the NHL's. I think the way they kind of name things and season not season are different, but it essentially does a lot of the similar things and quickly gets them into the playoffs. Thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, the 13-9, basically, in essence, they took the teams that are in realistic contention, is basically sort of what it is. Number one, the recent development within the past day of us recording this is that there have been a couple of players, Kyrie, Irving, and Dwight Howard are the ones leading the charge, that are now saying we don't want to play any basketball at all for social reasons, which we're all going to kill each other if we get into on the show, most likely. But Kyrie Irving and Dwight Howard have gotten a group of players to some size or group or another to say we don't want to play at all because it's not the right thing to do. Don't know if that's going to come true. If it's not, if the NBA cares about that, but that is a development to work to. That's a development to watch. In terms of my thoughts on the plan, it's okay. I think it's kind of silly to say you and your families are quarantined at Disney World when Disney World's going to be open. That's kind of dumb. But in terms of the effect on the fans, at least it gets everybody back and playing. It finishes the season. It doesn't engender a bunch of ill will with the fans. They're going to get a champion. The Lakers are going to get their crown, and that's really all that I care about. Yeah, so I think it's a decent enough plan. Again, I think it's kind of dumb to have it at Disney World, but that's neither here nor there. So it's a decent resolution to the conflict, and it's kind of like hockey, like you said. Baseball could do something similar if they wanted to. It's a reasonable solution. Congratulations on it, assuming they can get these guys out there actually playing.
Yeah, and
the social guys out there playing.
And Wojciechowski had reported, and if he reports something, it usually has a pretty good ring of truth. He's the most connected NBA insider on the face of the earth, basically. And he was also reporting earlier this past week that there was about 40 to 50 players who had concerns about quarantining in Orlando and stuff. So they may have a few things, although the Players Association did ratify this plan.
Yeah, well, it's the reason why I think it's dumb. The players can bring their families into the bubble. Can you imagine bringing your wife and your kids into the bubble and say, "Listen, kids, we're going to go to Disney World, but don't get excited because you can't leave the hotel." What you can do is you can get binoculars and you can look at, Magic Mountain from your hotel room. That's not going to go over well, with the kids. It'd probably be better just from a sanity's perspective if they moved it somewhere else. But again, that's a personal problem with the players. So, that's not really our concern. It just seems kind of silly to me. But, the social stuff aside, I think it's a decent plan. I'm for it. I'm all for finishing the season in as normal a way as possible. And this is a pretty decent way to do it.
Yeah, I don't have any problem at all with the plan. I think it's fine. I think that they're trying to get something together and package it up in a good media package that makes it attractive to their audience. I think that they've succeeded in that. I think they've done a good job of trying to find a way with a limited amount of sort of playing window to be able to put together something that's compelling and exciting and has some drama. And in some ways, for that matter, as a sort of a casual basketball fan, I find this a more entertaining experience than a long season where most of the games, from my perspective, don't really matter all that much. For me, this just gets right into the heart of the action, and I think it's going to be a more exciting experience than I usually have with basketball.
Well, what also has not been an issue is the money. Notice how the NBA and the Players Association have had zero controversy about the money that's the players are being paid for this.
Or
Zero.
if there has been any disagreement about it, they've kept it indoors,
Right.
And kept it. Hey, if we're not cool with something, so it's kudos either way, right? Either they figured out a really good system, or if they don't have a good system, at least they have the presence of mind to deal with it internally and not have it be a Twitter spat.
Yeah, exactly right. And so the public is not mad at the NBA. The public is mad at Major League Baseball. And they did it to themselves. They did. If hockey, for God's sakes, can get it. Hockey's the one that missed the whole season, remember? In a labor dispute. If hockey can get their act together, there's no reason baseball can't. In basketball, I think we all always thought that basketball was going to get their act together one way or another. I did, at least.
They did it to themselves.
They did.
I agree.
It's slightly different than. I mean, I agree with all this, especially on the they handled their business part. But the overhead on player salaries is a much different thing in Major League Baseball versus the NBA, just because of size of rosters and because the NBA has a fully subsidized minor leagues called college basketball.
Yeah. I mean, but their payrolls are smaller, in basketball for sure. Yeah, absolutely. But that's also why they're playing these regular season games or the tournament or playing games or whatever they want, because that's going to get them paid under the regular TV contracts for regular season games, and that makes up for whatever loss they have because of fans. Because the baseball, a higher percentage of baseball revenue comes from local ticket sales than is true in football, NFL, and NBA. And so the Major League Baseball has a bigger problem, whereas the NBA TV contract is ginormous. Contracts, plural, are ginormous. And I think, as a matter of fact, they even just entered into an extension on the TBS deal, if I recall, as a matter of fact, just recently. So it's a little bit easier for them to solve their problem, I think.
Well, we'll see. I think they'll smooth over the bumps, and if a couple players don't play, I guess that's between them and their team.
And don't play. And don't play. Right.
So we'll see. I think we will see this all kick off in their timeline. At least it will begin. Well, let's go to John. We could not have you back for your first show without somehow getting into our esports sports, which I don't think we necessarily get to in this discussion of the Madden EA game, but we got to have some version of that discussion to honor your return. So do you want to walk us through what the heck is going on with this Madden football controversy?
Sure, I would be happy to. And it's really nice to be back and be able to talk about stuff I care about. So in March, Electronic Arts, the National Football League, renewed their contract for Madden. And what that means, it used to be back in the glory days, as gamers like to refer to it, that basically anybody could put together a sports game, and if you had enough money, you could go out and sign a deal with a major sports league, such as the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball, and have the rights to put all of the team names and colors and stadiums and players into your game. And it cost you a little bit, but it was worth it because you could put the NFL shield on the game. And there used to be lots of great NFL games. And then a number of years ago, Electronic Arts realized that, hey, if I pay the NFL more money, I can get an exclusive deal where they'll only give this license to us. And so for some time, the only NFL games that you saw was Madden. That's a little bit different today. In today's world, the agreement that was signed in March is that the EA has the exclusive rights to make a simulation football game. So for those of you who are not well versed in games, you have different genres of games. There's action games, shooter games. One of those genres is simulation, and a simulation game is trying to do just that. It's trying to simulate the real world experience. And Madden is the best attempt that anybody has made to date to simulate a real-life football game. But there are also arcade games. So when you see the games that you can play in the arcades for a quarter, or it's probably 50 cents or $1 now, who the hell knows, or sometimes you see them on the PlayStation and so forth, these are games that you might have 3 offensive linemen and 2 receivers, and it's like 7-on-7 football, and there's lots of fire shooting out of people's shoes, and people get hit, and they're in the like Brian Moorman flying through the air for 5 yards before they hit the ground, Sean Taylor style arcade game. And so arcade games are still sort of open season, and the NFL did a deal, in fact, with 2K Sports, where Take-Two Interactive is going to be able to continue to make non-simulation football games. But from now until, I believe this deal goes through 2026, only Electronic Arts is going to be able to make simulation football game. This is something that makes a lot of gamers angry, because I think, as Steve will tell you, if you control the market, and you limit the number of people in the market down to 1, you're not really going to get as innovative and robust a product as you will if you open the market up to have multiple people innovate in that space. Is that right, Steve?
Yeah, I think so. The NFL likes exclusive deals. Like notice. Well, they do. They like exclusive deals. Notice that's the same thing they've done with their DirecTV package. With NFL, NFL Game Pass, I think it's called, right? They're the exclusive provider, unless you're in New York City, is DirecTV. They like that. I think that the NFL views itself as the 8 million pound gorilla, which they are. And they like the idea of being able to bully everybody else around. From a legal perspective, I mean, that's what they do. They will bully you because they can. And I think they kind of like the idea of having an exclusive video game provider, basically. Because, I mean, also, John, I'm assuming that the arcade-style games are a pretty small percentage of the market, right?
Yeah, the majority of the market is definitely in the simulation-style games.
Right, and so they like the idea of having an exclusive provider. I think that goes well with their brand. That is, we're the NFL, we're the big dog, we control everything. Look, we control the video game industry too. I mean, I think that sort of fits with the NFL.
It is a very 800-pound gorilla friendly agreement, because EA as well likes being the 8 million pound gorilla in the video game business, specifically in the sports business. The only significant sports title, I believe, that really competes is Pro Evolution Soccer, and that's because FIFA doesn't work the same as the NFL. FIFA is not a single entity that controls every single license that you want to get if you want to make a soccer game, whether it's a license with Manchester United, whether it's a license with the Spanish League. You have to go get all of those licenses individually, which is what makes that impossible. But they're not exclusive licenses, and as a result, you have a lot of more opportunity to make a wider variety of those games.
Also, FIFA, half of FIFA's own leadership went to prison a couple years ago. They sound like they have other stuff to worry about.
Yeah. Seth Blatter, what was his name?
Seth Blatter. Yeah.
That guy. Yeah. But so, from a gaming fan's perspective, this is terrible. Because the knock has been for some time that the titles that have exclusive agreements really just get kind of the minimum updates. Now that's not entirely what's happening, and I can say that in full disclosure, I worked at Electronic Arts for about 10 years, and I did work on sports titles. And one of the things that I can tell you is, even though there's a lot of you'll see a lot of memes about it just being a roster update and all they did was change the ratings. The fact of the matter is, trying to build a full physics engine from scratch, as is the case every few years of these games, or in FIFA's case, they added women's teams. They had to build an entire female body rig and add the different animations and things like that. These things are not easy to do, and for any team to crank that out over the span of 1 year is pretty damn impressive. I know everybody wants to see bigger changes, but it gets hard too, because how much more football-y do you want it to be than where it is now? And so there's only so much you can do to make the game more realistic, other than having J.J. Watt come punch you in the face when you blow your coverage.
Well, yeah, I mean, the game of football doesn't change that. Real football doesn't change that much.
Not
so
that
at some
much.
point, once you get a simulation that's remarkably like the real game, I don't know what else you can really do.
Well, and they also have to dedicate a certain amount of time every year to making changes that keep up with the changes made by the NFL in the terms of their rule set. If they, when they change how the game is played, well, these guys have to go, make those changes in Madden, and they may be changes that if you're a developer, and I've been in the development industry for 25 years. If you develop these things and you don't know how it's going to change in the future, anything that you write, could really be boxing you in, down the road when somebody says, "Oh, by the way, we're going to change how kickoffs work this year." Well, you certainly didn't know that when you wrote the kickoff formula 15 years ago, and so now suddenly you've got to tweak code that is ancient. And the people who wrote it aren't there anymore. This stuff is harder than people think it is.
Well, the other thing I can't stop thinking about with this is how much better could a game by another developer possibly be? I mean, EA Sports is the EA Sports Madden football game is a mature game.
Yes, it is.
I mean, I don't know how another developer could make one that takes a substantial market share.
I think you'd be surprised. There's a lot of things that you can do in terms of presentation. There's a lot of things you can do in terms of incorporating different NFL personalities into the game and the way it hasn't been done before. You could make changes to gameplay. There are a lot of people who loved the NCAA football game, which is gone now. And there are a lot of questions about if you want to revive the NCAA brands, whether it's basketball, football, how are you going to deal with paying players? Do you pay players? Where's the NCAA on that? That's a whole nother show. But being able to broaden the experience, are people really interested in playing as Pat Mahomes, or are they more interested in playing as a kid going through high school trying to make a name for themselves and make it to the Hall of Fame, which is a more compelling story? But you really can take the pro football narrative and approach it from a number of different ways to make different competing products.
I actually think on your last show, we discussed the NCAA game and the licensing issues. That's kind of funny. Full circle.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too.
I'm kind of a one-trick pony, if you haven't noticed.
I just had a
Hey, everybody, let's talk about video games for a minute.
I just had a brilliant idea. Somebody, Blizzard or Rockstar or some other big, legitimate, hot game company, should do two things simultaneously. They should build a new football game, call it pro football game, but not the NFL, no licensing, right? And maybe even do some of the things, John, you talk about in terms of narrative and gameplay. And then simultaneously create an esports league that is that football game, and launch those two things in tandem, and it would be the only legitimate path for an alternative pro football league would be the esports path with its own game.
So I'm going to cut you off there, Chris, and you and I should probably talk after the show, because that's actually it's actually a concept that I have designed up and pitched once or twice myself. I love it. It's very, very hard to get investors to buy into the idea. Sort of as Steve said, there's a lot of people that don't really intuitively believe that you can do better than Madden. Now, with that being said, a successful video game does not have to make more money than Madden does in order to be a successful video game. That's a really high bar to set for yourself if you're starting out with something. But yeah, my personal pet passion project, in fact, the way that I have spent my time while going through chemotherapy and rehabilitating my stomach and all the things that I've had to do, I've actually spent my time teaching myself C# and Unity so that I could get in and start messing around with some of these concepts. I have a working simulation world now. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, I've always felt that the better product would be take an MMO approach to a sports title, allow people to create their own characters, You want to be a flashy, fast receiver, that's great. If you want to be a big, powerful lineman, great. If you want to try to make Reggie White, go for it. And get out there, and you start off by being a young person playing sort of pickup games. You work your way into you go to high school and you get onto your high school team, trying to make a name for yourself, so you get a scholarship somewhere. And then get into the pro leagues, and you can do this as an esports league in an MMO style set in a sports world. It would be a product that's never been seen before, which makes people hesitant to invest in it. But I think it would be a lot of fun, and I think it's feasible.
It's a better investment than a real alternative sports league, as we have found out multiple times, even in the last couple of years.
Don't buy a baseball team.
Don't try to start a weird little football league.
Right.
Yeah.
The AFL, the XFL, they all go away. And there were about 3 others that were in the works that have, I would assume, fallen by the wayside.
Yeah. AFL was fantastic for a week.
Their ratings suggested otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, there we go. So some good ideas out there for you if you want. Is anyone... I miss the old, brawler ball football games. Will we see, John? Do you think we'll see a reemergence of those kind of weird versions of football games? Yeah,
you're going to see. So some of the great titles that people enjoyed in the past, Chaos League stuff, Blood Bowl stuff. There was something called, I think it was 713 AD, that featured a bunch of Vikings running around a field with axes. And you would run into a pile of hay, and the guy would drop the football and yell, "Hey!" Which I thought was terrific. You could run under a tree, get caught in a noose, typical stuff like that. But yeah, the kinds of wacky, over-the-top stuff, those fall into the arcade category. They are not considered simulation games, and thus are not restricted by this exclusive deal. But at the same time, how many of those types of games are going to need the official Dallas Cowboys logo? It's you could make those regardless of this deal, as long as you didn't try to do anything specifically NFL related with them. But even with this deal now, if you wanted to try to get a license with the NFL, you'd be allowed to, because those weren't considered simulation games.
I don't think the NFL wants to be associated with silly games like that, though.
They do and they don't. So there was a time, particularly during the Roselle era, where they really didn't want to be seen as anything other than a serious, no, we don't want people hitting each other and having smoke come out of their ears, or anything like this. It's stupid. I think that these days, though, you're starting to see them open up a little bit in terms of being able to, if there's a revenue stream, I think the revenue stream now speaks louder than the image stream. And so I think that you will see some more titles. What you're not going to see is a lot of NHL games back in the day used to have a lot of fighting in them. They are trying to control sort of a violence image, so you're not going to see a lot of the uber violent things with the NFL logo on them. But you are going to see little games like NFL Blitz that are just kind of an arcadey take on football.
Interesting.
Yeah, I love it. I love to get to esports look back with you, John. I enjoy it. It's funny. And then when we get real sports versus not real, I always enjoy being a bystander to that argument. So I look forward to that in future shows, because I find it highly I have no dog in the fight necessarily, but I find it highly entertaining.
Next time that subject comes up, I'm gonna go get cancer again.
Please don't do that.
Jeez,
a bit of an overreaction, perhaps.
That'll show them.
Whew. All right, I think with that wraps up our John Returns show.
Woo!
John, any way you want to promote yourself, put yourself back out in the world here?
Hey, listen, everybody, I'm amazing. I think it's important for everybody to know that. And honestly, I killed my Twitter account, made another one, and I don't remember. There's a bunch of numbers in it. So if for some reason somebody wants to get in touch with me, reach out to the Hogsty. Those guys know how to reach me. Yeah, that's all the self-promotion I need. If I self-promoted anymore, I'd dominate the internet.
Okay, so John's Twitter
Humble
is
brag.
John War 500130075. Why he has
Well,
8
because
numbers? I don't
because
know.
there's 14 million other John Worlds.
Okay.
I just put my name in, and it didn't even give me the option. It just said, "Okay, here's your @ sign." It was terrible.
So there you go. That's John.
What's going on in the world of the Hogsty, Steve?
The Hogsty Seasons of Discontent is still on hiatus for a few more weeks, but they'll be back. Hogsty, we are in the throes of the downs time in the NFL calendar. We're into the position group breakdowns and whatnot. But we will ramp that up with training camp at the end of July. So we've got all of our regular written content as per normal, of course. So please check it out.
Yeah, if you guys haven't checked out the cornerbacks breakdown, that was a good one recently. So go have a look at that.
Who wrote that, John? I'm not sure.
We was a fellow named something with an S.
Yes.
All right, you can find me at ChrisLarry33. We will see you in 2 weeks.